In today's video, we are going to talk about 5 things. What is a sprint backlog and a product backlog? Why do they exist? Who the owners of these are? What are their key characteristics? And what are the best practices when it comes to managing them? So if you are interested in any or all of them, stay tuned. Alright, now let's start off with the definitions. So the first one being the product backlog. The product backlog is a dynamic list of all the desired features, enhancements and the fixes for a particular product. It represents the full scope of work that could be done to complete the product. The product owner, in collaboration with stakeholders, creates and maintains the product backlog. It is typically an ordered list with the most important items at the top. Now, on the other hand, a sprint backlog, it is a subset of a product backlog and it contains the items selected for a specific sprint. A sprint is a fixed time boxed iteration, typically lasting from 1 to 4 weeks, in which a development team completes a set of user stories or tasks. Now, I'm sure this is not the first time that you are hearing these definitions. But what's the use of it? Why do we need to get fancy and worry about these things? So a very short and a sweet answer to this is that a sprint backlog and a product backlog, these are very key components in an product development cycle, because these are used for managing and prioritizing the work that needs to be built by the engineering team. That is like a one-liner statement of why the product and a sprint backlog makes real sense and why it should be followed in the way it's designed to. Alright, so I hope this makes sense on why it exists and what purpose it solves. Now let's look at what the key characteristics of each of these are. Starting off with the product backlog. Here are some of the key characteristics. 1. This is where the high-level user stories or the requirements are kept and maintained, like you can visually view them on the product backlog. Second, these are prioritized and refined as and when the team gets together to do that. So this is the place wherein the team goes and refers to whenever they are in the sprint refinement meeting. These list of requirements or the user stories, these are effectively translating the entire product vision into a paper, a digital paper you can say. But this is where that vision is turned into reality because it contains the list of all these user stories. Now the items that can be there on a product backlog are, it could be new feature, it could be an enhancement to an existing feature, it could be a bug fix which either you have identified or support have identified. There could be research items in there. So there could be many types of work items which are created on the product backlog, and it is a responsibility of the engineering team to make sure that they get together on a regular cadence to go through the product backlog and refine it. Now, even before the team is involved, it is a product manager's responsibility to make sure that backlog is prioritized. Now, this also means that it is not constant. It's not like you do this exercise once in 6 months or once in a year. This product backlog evolves over time. I'm sure you understand that if you have worked in a development team, bugs get added very often, research items get added very often, so requirements in some cases get added very often, and enhancements requests to the existing product gets added very often. So this is what the product backlog actually contains. Now moving over to a sprint backlog. What exactly is a sprint backlog? So this is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a subset of a product backlog. So a couple of items which are prioritized by the product manager during the sprint planning meeting, those are the items which get onto the sprint backlog. As an example, there are 50 work items or user stories. I say work items because it could be a mix of user stories or tasks or bugs or whatever. I'll just call it work items. So assuming there are 50 work items in the product backlog which needs doing in general. Now the team cannot accomplish all the 50 work items in one sprint, right? Let's be realistic, it's not possible. So that is where the sprint backlog comes in picture. So when there is a sprint planning meeting, I think I already spoke in product backlog, there is something called a sprint refinement meeting, which is where the product manager and the development team, they go through the list of prioritized items and refine them. When I say refine, it means like adding as much detail as possible in the user story, providing the estimates for it and stuff like that. Now, after the refinement has happened, after the product backlog has the top prioritized item on the top of the backlog, In the sprint planning meeting, those prioritized items get moved from product backlog into a sprint backlog. So it's only a handful of items that gets moved into sprint backlog. Now obviously that depends on what's the capacity of the team. If there are 10 engineers working on it, there could be a lot more than that. But if it's usually an agile team wherein only 2 or 3 engineers per team are allocated, that's when maybe only 5 or 6 or whatever the velocity for the team is, those are the items which will make it to the sprint back. Now, who owns this? This is not owned by product manager. Product manager, yes, dictates or is responsible for items that should go on the sprint backlog, but after that it is the responsibility of the development team to make sure that they are pulling in the work items into the sprint as and when necessary. So what I mean by that is, suppose out of those 50 only 5 made it to the sprint backlog because maybe there were just 2 engineers on the team as an example. So of those 5 work items which are in the sprint backlog, so one engineer picks up one, other one picks up the other one, there still are 3 items left on the sprint backlog. Then whoever gets free first, whichever engineer is done with their existing development work on an existing work item first, they will be pulling the work item from the sprint backlog. So the product manager doesn't necessarily need to dictate like you have to pull this after this or whatever, because that is what is left for the engineers to decide as and when they are developing the product. So these are the main characteristics of product backlog and a sprint backlog. I think I have briefly spoken about it, but I'll emphasize it again on who the owners of each of these are. For the product backlog, the owner, as I mentioned earlier, is a product manager because the backlog is their responsibility. The product backlog, anything that gets into product backlog, they should be aware of it. They should be checking that out very frequently. So that should be product manager's responsibility. Sprint backlog, on the other hand, should be engineers or the development team's responsibility, because the product manager does not necessarily need to dictate what you should be working on next. The engineers should have that autonomy within their team. So with the help of product like if in cases wherein they need help, I don't know which one should I pick, are there any recommendations in terms of priority? PM might be included in that discussion, they might not be, but mainly it's engineers who can do it themselves. So that is where the ownership lies. Now that is all for today's video. If there's anything else that you do that I could learn from you today, do let me know via comments. Otherwise, I am going to see you all next week. Bye bye.